What happens when the person pouring your drink has a past darker than the stout on tap? When a smile hides a secret, and every cocktail served is a step closer to a cold, calculated revenge. Tonight, we delve into a story of a woman who uses her beauty as a weapon and her charm as a trap, hunting the men who destroyed her life, one powerful tycoon at a time. This is a story of seduction, betrayal, and murder. Before we pour the first glass of this intoxicating tale, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications. You won't want to miss a single drop of this story. Now, let's begin. The Alchemist wasn't merely a bar. It was a confession booth disguised in velvet and dark mahogany. Tucked away in a cobblestone artery of Tribeca, it catered to the city's gods, the titans of finance, the moguls of media, the kings of concrete and steel who reshaped Manhattan's skyline with a flick of their pen. And at the heart of this gilded chamber, polishing a crystal glass until it shone with near-divine light, was Alara. To the patrons of the Alchemist, she was an enigma, a beautiful contradiction. Her hair was the color of midnight, a cascade of dark silk that fell over one shoulder. Her eyes, a startling shade of amber, seemed to hold ancient secrets, seeing not just the man ordering a 50-year-old Macallan, but the architecture of his soul, the cracks in his foundation. Her smile was her most potent cocktail, mixed with a dash of warmth, a hint of mystery, and a potent, lingering finish that left men wondering about her long after they'd paid their exorbitant tabs. They saw a gorgeous bartender, a fantasy. What they didn't see was the furnace of a meticulously controlled inferno raging behind those amber eyes. They didn't see the ghost she conversed with in the quiet moments between orders. Tonight, her focus was singular. He sat in his usual booth, the one in the corner that offered both privacy and a commanding view of the room. Marcus Thorne, a man carved from the same granite as the skyscrapers he built, with a mane of silver hair and a face that looked like it had been in a lifelong argument with joy. He was a lion in the winter of his life, still powerful, still predatory, but with a loneliness that clung to him like the scent of his expensive cologne. Alara knew that loneliness. She had studied it, catalogued it, and planned to use it as her key. She moved with a dancer's grace, her hips swaying gently beneath the tailored black dress that served as her uniform. She placed a small, complimentary bowl of spiced almonds on his table. "The usual Mr. Thorne?" she asked, her voice a low, melodic hum. He grunted, not looking up from the contracts spread before him. "And don't drown it in ice this time." "Never," she whispered, a promise in her tone. As she prepared his drink, her mind drifted back, pulled by the undertow of memory. The ghosts began to speak. It was a different life, a different girl. A girl named Sophia, with paint-stained fingers and a laugh that echoed through a sun-drenched architectural studio. Her father, Antonio Rossi, was a dreamer who built worlds from paper and ink. He wasn't a tycoon, he was an artist. His designs were poetry in glass and steel, celebrated for their elegance and humanity. He believed in light, in open spaces, in buildings that breathed with the city. Then Marcus Thorne and his consortium came. They were called the Triumvirate in the press: Thorne, the builder, Julian Croft, the tech prodigy, and their political puppet master, Senator Alastair Paddington. They wanted Antonio's visionary design for the new waterfront development, a project that would redefine the city's edge. Antonio was ecstatic, seeing it as the culmination of his life's work. He poured his heart into the blueprints, working day and night. Sophia would bring him coffee, her heart swelling with pride as he explained the intricate dance of light and shadow, the sustainable materials, the public gardens woven into the structure. "A building is a gift to the city, cara mia," he would say, his eyes sparkling. But Thorne and his partners didn't want a gift. They wanted a monument to their own avarice. They took Antonio's designs, his name, his soul, and twisted them. They used legal loopholes, predatory contracts, and a mountain of debt to seize the project, patenting his innovations as their own. They bled him dry, professionally and financially. They dragged his name through the mud, painting him as incompetent, a dreamer who couldn't handle a project of this magnitude. Antonio Rossi, the poet of architecture, was broken on the altar of their greed. The bank foreclosed on their home. The studio was shuttered. The shame was a physical weight, crushing the light from her father's eyes. Sophia, then 19, found him in his study one gray Tuesday morning, the scent of gunpowder hanging in the air like a final bitter word. A single note on his desk read, "They stole my sky." That was the day Sophia died and Alara was born. Forged in the crucible of loss and rage, she built a new identity from the ashes. She sold the few remaining possessions, moved to the city their city, and began her education. Not in a university, but in the dark underbelly of power. She learned about finance, about law, about human weakness. She learned how the powerful insulate themselves, the circles they move in, the places they drink. And she learned to wait. She spent years honing herself into a weapon, her grief a whetstone sharpening her resolve. Her beauty, once a simple fact of her genetics, was now her armor and her sharpest blade. She secured a job at the Alchemist, the preferred watering hole of the gods, and waited for the lion to come to her. The clink of the ice in the crystal glass brought her back to the present. She had made Thorn's drink perfectly, a single, large, clear sphere of ice to chill the scotch without diluting it. An art form, a detail he would appreciate. She walked back to his table, her movements deliberate. This was the night. All the weeks of quiet observation, of demure smiles and feigned admiration, had led to this moment. Her plan was a complex piece of architecture, just like her father used to design, and tonight she was laying the cornerstone. As she leaned in to place the drink on his coaster, she allowed her hand to slip. The glass tilted, and a wave of amber liquid splashed across the back of Thorn's hand and onto a stack of important-looking documents. He swore, jerking his hand back. "God damn it! Are you blind?" Panic, expertly feigned, flashed across Alara's face. "Oh my God, Mr. Thorn, I am so sorry. I don't know what happened." She was immediately at his side with a cloth, dabbing at the papers, her brow furrowed with theatrical concern. Her fingers brushed against his, and she let a subtle tremor run through them. "These are signed contracts, you clumsy fool," he roared, though his anger was already being tempered by her proximity, by the scent of her perfumous subtle blend of vanilla and sandalwood she'd chosen specifically for its calming, alluring properties. "Please let me," she insisted, her voice trembling just enough. "I'll get another cloth. I am so terribly sorry." She was close now, her hair almost brushing his cheek as she carefully blotted the expensive paper. He could feel the warmth of her body, see the delicate curve of her neck. He saw her distress, her beauty, her vulnerability. The lion's roar softened to a growl. "Just be careful," he grumbled, watching her. "Of course," she said, finally looking up at him, her amber eyes wide and apologetic. "Please, allow me to replace your drink. On the house, of course. And perhaps for your trouble, dinner? Sometime? To make up for my clumsiness. It's the least I can do." It was a bold move, but she'd calculated the odds. He was arrogant. A woman like her, seemingly flustered and impressed by him, offering herself up as an apology? His ego would never allow him to refuse. A slow smile spread across his face, predatory and self-satisfied. He leaned back, appraising her. "Dinner, you say? I suppose I could forgive you. Over a bottle of something far too expensive for this place." "I would like that," she said, her smile shy, but her eyes holding his, a silent promise passing between them. The cornerstone had been laid. The seduction of Marcus Thorn was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Alara became the woman she sensed he needed. Not a sycophant, but a bright, ambitious girl from a small town, a little starstruck by the city and by him. She listened, truly listened, when he spoke not just to his words but to the spaces between them. She heard the vanity, the insecurity, the deep-seated fear of irrelevance that haunted all aging titans. Their first dinner was at a Michelin-starred restaurant where the waiters moved like ghosts. She wore a simple, elegant red dress that clung to her curves, a stark contrast to the severe black of her uniform. She let him talk, guiding the conversation with innocent questions about his empire, his genius, his vision. He drank it in, preening under her rapt attention. He spoke of crushing rivals and hostile takeovers as if they were grand battles won, and she looked at him with what he mistook for awe. It was, in fact, forensic analysis. She learned of his routines, his early morning swim in the private pool of his penthouse, his weekly poker game with other predators, his reliance on a specific brand of antacid for his chronic heartburn, a symptom of stress and a rich diet. And, most importantly, she learned of his heart. During their third dinner, he clutched his chest for a moment, his face paling slightly. He waved it away as a bit of indigestion, but Alara had seen the flicker of fear in his eyes. The next day, she made a call to a former client from the bar, a disgraced pharmaceutical researcher she had once helped out of a jam. A few $1,000s, transferred through a series of untraceable crypto accounts, procured what she needed: a refined digitalis extract, a poison derived from the foxglove plant. In small, controlled doses, it was a heart medication. In a slightly larger, carefully calibrated dose, it would induce a massive, untraceable cardiac arrest, its symptoms virtually indistinguishable from a natural heart attack in a man of Thorne's age, health, and high-stress lifestyle. The perfect crime, hidden in plain sight within the victim's own biology. She kept the tiny vial in a secret compartment in her purse, a cold promise against her skin. Their relationship escalated. He was a man used to buying what he wanted, and he believed he was buying her. He showered her with gifts: a diamond necklace she wore once to please him and then locked away, a vintage Chanel bag she used to carry the instrument of his death. She played her part to perfection, a mix of gratitude, fascination, and burgeoning affection. She allowed him into her apartment, a small, clean, and entirely fake space she had rented under a false name, decorated with a backstory of a girl from Ohio with dreams of being a dancer. There were no pictures of her father, no hint of Sophia Rossi. It was a sterile stage for her final performance. The end came on a rainy Thursday night, a month after the accidental spill. He had invited her to his penthouse for a private dinner. "I'll have my chef prepare something special," he'd purred over the phone. The penthouse was a sterile palace of glass and steel, overlooking Central Park. It was cold, impersonal, and breathtakingly expensive, a mausoleum for a man's ego. Thorne, dressed in a silk smoking jacket, greeted her with a proprietary kiss. "You look exquisite, my dear," he said, his eyes roaming over her. She wore a black velvet dress, elegant and funereal. They ate, they drank vintage Bordeaux, and he boasted about a new deal that would displace thousands of families to build a new luxury condominium. "The city has to evolve," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "The weak get left behind. It's the law of the jungle." Alara felt the furnace inside her roar, but her face remained a mask of serene interest. "You must be so proud," she said, her voice soft. After dinner, he led her to the balcony. The rain had subsided, leaving the city lights glittering like a carpet of scattered jewels below. It was a view bought with the wreckage of other people's lives, of her father's life. "I own all of this," he said, his gesture expansive, possessive. "From here, you can see the world for what it is. A collection of assets. Everything and everyone has a price." He turned to her, his eyes gleaming. "I'm glad I found you, Alara." "I'm glad you found me too, Marcus," she said. She suggested a final nightcap, a special brandy she had brought as a gift. "It's a rare, private batch Armagnac," she explained, unpacking the bottle from her bag. "I thought it would be perfect for a special occasion." His eyes lit up at the prospect of something rare and exclusive. He turned his back to get 2 snifters from his bar cart. That was all the time she needed. Her movements were fluid, economical. She uncorked the bottle. With a tiny, almost invisible syringe, she drew the digitalis from its vial. In a single, precise motion, she injected the clear liquid into the neck of the brandy bottle, where it mixed invisibly with the dark liquor. The empty vial and syringe disappeared back into her purse. Took less than 3 seconds. She poured 2 glasses, handing one to him. Her own glass was for show. "To us?" he toasted, clinking his glass against hers. and to new acquisitions. To paying our debts, she replied, her voice a cryptic whisper he didn't catch. He took a deep swallow, sighing in satisfaction at the taste. Magnificent, he declared. She watched him, her heart a cold, steady metronome counting down the final seconds of his life. They spoke for a few more minutes, the poison beginning its silent, deadly work. He started to sweat. He loosened his jacket, complaining of the stuffiness in the room. He put his hand to his chest. That indigestion. Again, he grumbled, his breathing becoming labored. Elara stood up and walked over to the bar, placing her untouched glass down. She turned to face him, the demure, admiring mask falling away, revealing the cold, hard fury beneath. Her amber eyes were no longer warm. They were chips of ice. "It's not indigestion, Marcus," she said, her voice clear and cold. He looked at her, confusion warring with the growing pain and panic on his face. "Elara? What's wrong? Get my pills. In the bathroom." "My name isn't Elara," she said, taking a step closer. The fear in his eyes was starting to bloom. "My name is Sophia Rossi." Recognition dawned, a slow, horrifying sunrise of understanding. He stared at her, his mouth agape, trying to connect the beautiful woman before him to the ruined architect he had destroyed years ago. "Rossi? Antonio Rossi's daughter," she finished for him. "You stole my father's sky. You took his work, his name, his life. You and your friends. You called it the law of the jungle. You said the weak get left behind." He tried to stand, to call for help, but his legs wouldn't obey. A crushing weight was settling on his chest. He was drowning in air. He looked at the brandy snifter in his hand, then back at her, his eyes wide with terror and disbelief. "You," he rasped, the word barely a sound. "Me," she confirmed. She knelt before him, so he was forced to look directly into her eyes. She wanted her face to be the last thing he saw. He was an artist, a good man, and you crushed him for a few extra percentage points on a real estate deal. You thought you were a lion, but even lions grow old. They get slow, and they never see the scavenger until it's too late. His breath came in ragged, useless gasps. The great Marcus Thorne, the titan of industry, was dying on his knees in his palace in the sky, helpless as a child. She didn't stay to watch the end. She knew the poison's timeline. She calmly walked to the door, wiping her fingerprints from the knob with a silk cloth from her purse. She took one last look at the gasping, dying man, a monument of greed crumbling into dust. She felt no pity, no remorse, only a cold, clean, empty satisfaction. The first debt had been paid. She rode the private elevator down, a ghost leaving the tomb. Out on the street, the city air felt clean for the first time in years. A news ticker on a nearby building was already reporting on a volatile stock market. The world kept turning. The next evening, Elara was back behind the bar at The Alchemist. Her hair was tied back, her smile was in place. Her amber eyes were warm and mysterious once more. Patrons murmured about the shocking news, the sudden, tragic death of Marcus Thorne. A heart attack, the papers said. A cautionary tale about the pressures of a high-powered life. Elara just polished her glasses, listening. Her gaze drifted across the room, past the usual suspects, and settled on a new face sitting in Thorne's newly vacant booth. He was younger, sharper, with the restless energy of the digital age. He was handsome, charismatic, and his eyes, glued to a tablet, shone with a fierce, predatory intelligence. Julian Croft, the tech prodigy, the second name in the triumvirate. He looked up, catching her eye. He smiled, a flash of white teeth and billion-dollar confidence. Elara met his gaze and allowed a small, curious smile to play on her lips. She began to mix a new cocktail, her movements fluid and purposeful. The hunt had just begun. The ghost of Marcus Thorne lingered in The Alchemist for less than a week. In the world of the obscenely wealthy, power vacuums are filled with the speed of a stock market crash. Thorne's corner booth, once his iron throne, became communal territory. For a few nights, it was occupied by a rotation of hedge fund bros and aging real estate developers, all picking at the scraps of his empire like vultures. But by the following Tuesday, a new king had claimed it. Julian Croft wasn't like the old guard. He didn't wear stuffy suits or bark orders into his phone. He wore $1,000 sneakers, a deceptively simple black t-shirt, and a watch that looked like a sleek piece of obsidian but was, in fact, a multi-million-dollar prototype from his own company, Elysian Systems. He didn't build with steel and concrete. He built with code and light. He had made his first billion by the age of 25 developing a predictive algorithm that was now used by every major intelligence agency and financial institution in the world. He was the digital ghost, the man who knew your secrets before you did. He was also the man who had provided the technological leverage to digitally erase Antonio Rossi's legacy, patenting his father's innovative structural algorithms as Elysian property. Alara watched him from behind the bar. He didn't drink scotch. He drank sparkling water with a sprig of organic mint, his eyes constantly scanning the room, not with Thorne's brutish sense of ownership, but with the cool, detached analysis of a processor. He wasn't looking at people, he was parsing data. He saw Alara, of course. She registered his gaze. A quick, appreciative scan that cataloged her physical attributes and filed her away. To him, she was a variable, an attractive but ultimately predictable element in his environment. Her strategy had to be different this time. The feigned clumsiness and damsel in distress act that had hooked Thorne would be an insult to Croft's intelligence. He preyed on complexity, not simplicity. He saw the world as a system to be hacked, and the ultimate challenge, the ultimate prize, was a system he couldn't immediately crack. Alara would be that system. For 3 nights, she ignored him. She served him his water with professional courtesy, her amber eyes revealing nothing. She was a blank slate, a beautiful enigma. She could feel his curiosity growing. It was a faint hum in the air, the thrum of a powerful mind encountering an unexpected variable. He was used to women fawning over him. Her polite indifference was a disruption in his code. On the 4th night, he made his move. "What's the most complex drink you know how to make?" he asked, not looking up from his tablet. Alara paused her polishing of a glass. "That depends on your definition of complex. Are we talking about the number of ingredients, the difficulty of the technique, or the subtlety of the flavor profile?" He finally looked up, a flicker of genuine interest in his sharp blue eyes. "All of the above." She placed the glass down and leaned forward slightly, her voice low. "The Commonwealth. It has over 70 ingredients, including single distilled spirits from 5 continents and bitters, made from botanicals that only grow above 3,000 meters. The technique involves temperature layering and a 15-minute aeration process. But if you make it correctly, all you taste is balance." He was silent for a moment, processing. He wasn't expecting an answer like that. "Can you make it?" She gave him the smallest of smiles. "I could, but the ingredients cost more than your watch. And I'm afraid it's not on the menu." A slow grin spread across his face. "I like things that aren't on the menu." Julian Croft. He extended a hand. "Alara," she replied, her handshake brief and firm. "Alara," he repeated, tasting the name. "No last name. Is one required to serve you sparkling water?" She countered, her tone light but the message clear. He laughed, a genuine, appreciative sound. "No, I suppose not." He tapped his tablet, and a moment later, her own phone, tucked away in her locker, vibrated with a notification. It was a friend request on a niche social media platform for sommeliers and mixologists. His message read, "Tell me more about this cocktail. Dinner? Tomorrow?" She had studied his digital footprint for months. She knew he would dig. The Alara persona she'd crafted was meticulously curated. It had a sparse but believable history, a few check-ins at culinary schools, a handful of photos from bartending competitions, a professional profile that was just impressive enough. Crucially, it had privacy settings locked down tighter than Fort Knox. She was a challenge, just as she'd intended. She accepted his request and his dinner invitation. Their first date was at a restaurant that was also a data-driven art installation. The lighting, music, and even the menu subtly changed based on biometric data collected from the diners. Croft loved it. He explained the algorithms behind the experience with boyish enthusiasm. Elara listened, interjecting with questions that were just sharp enough to show she was keeping up. She didn't feign ignorance. She feigned a different kind of intelligentsian analog, intuitive one. She spoke about the art of mixology, the soul of a vintage wine, the story behind a recipe. She framed her world in terms he found fascinatingly archaic, like a beautiful, undigitized manuscript. "You see things differently," he said, studying her across the table. "You don't see systems. You see feelings." "A good bartender has to," she replied. "I'm not serving drinks. I'm serving moods. Solace, celebration, escape. That's an algorithm you can't code." He was hooked. Over the next few weeks, she allowed him into her world, or rather, the carefully constructed stage set of her world. He was used to the predictable, transactional nature of relationships in his sphere. Elara was different. She was a puzzle. She was fiercely independent, refusing his offers to buy her expensive gifts or move her into a better apartment. "I like my life," she'd say simply. "I built it myself." The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth. The key she needed was access to his fortress. Croft lived in a penthouse that made Thorns look like a relic. It was a marvel of smart technology, a fully integrated Elysian home environment. Everything from the temperature and the opacity of the windows to the nutritional content of the food dispensed from his kitchen was controlled by a central AI he'd named Ariadne. He called it the safest home in New York, a seamless, frictionless living space. Elara knew it would be her kill room. She finally agreed to visit after turning him down twice, building the anticipation. As he gave her the tour, his pride was palpable. "Ariadne," he said to the empty air, "run diagnostic." A pleasant female voice filled the room. "All systems nominal. Environmental controls at optimal levels. Security protocols active. Welcome, Elara. Your biometric signature has been temporarily added as a trusted guest." Elara's heart beat a steady, cold rhythm. This was it. While he was showing her the view from his balcony, she accidentally dropped her earring. It rolled under a console in the main living area. As she knelt to retrieve it, her fingers brushed against the smooth, cool metal. Her other hand, hidden from his view, slipped a tiny device, no bigger than a thumbnail, from a hidden pocket in her dress. It was a sophisticated Wi-Fi sniffer and spoofer, designed by the same disgraced researcher who had supplied her digitalis. With a faint magnetic click, it attached itself to the underside of the console near the main network hub. It was designed to passively absorb data packets for 24 hours, mapping the network, identifying vulnerabilities, and then, on her command, inject a single malicious code string before erasing its own presence. "Got it?" she said, standing up, the earring in her palm and a triumphant smile on her face that he mistook for simple pleasure. The plan was audacious, and its success relied on Croft's ultimate weakness, his intellectual vanity. He believed his system was perfect because he had designed it. He couldn't conceive of a threat that was both sophisticated enough to challenge it and analog enough to get past his personal defenses. He was looking for hackers in Moscow or Shanghai, not the bartender with the amber eyes whose hand he was holding. Her chosen weapon was his prized possession, a state-of-the-art, hermetically sealed wellness pod in his master bathroom. It was a combination steam room, sauna, and sensory deprivation chamber. He used it every night before bed to optimize his cellular regeneration, as he called it. It was his sanctuary, his womb. It was also completely controlled by Ariadne. From her own apartment, using a heavily encrypted laptop routed through a dozen international servers, Elara watched the data stream in from her device. It was beautiful in its complexity. She saw the code that controlled the locks, the steam vents, the temperature regulators, the oxygen levels. She saw the failsafes, and she saw the flaw. The system had a manual override, a physical button inside the pod. But in the event of a total system crash, a catastrophic software failure, the override would be useless. The pod would simply follow its last command until it was rebooted externally. Croft, in his arrogance, had designed the reboot sequence to be incredibly complex, requiring a two-factor authentication that involved his personal tablet and a voice command. If he was in the pod when the system crashed, he would be trapped. Alara wrote her code. It was a work of art, a digital poison. It was designed to do three things in rapid succession. First, it would instruct Ariadne to initiate Croft's pre-sleep steam cycle. Second, as soon as he was inside and the door was sealed, it would trigger a catastrophic system crash, simulating a massive power surge. Third, in the chaos of the crash, it would leave one final, ghost command active. Override all temperature and steam regulators to their absolute maximum, and disable the oxygen circulation vent. The perfect digital murder. The pod would become a pressure cooker. The official cause of death would be system malfunction and user error. A tragic accident. The night she chose was a Thursday. She was working the late shift at The Alchemist, her alibi visible to 24 witnesses. At 11:15 p.m., she knew Croft would be finishing his work and preparing for his nightly ritual. She excused herself from the bar. "Be right back," she said to her colleague. In the staff bathroom, she pulled out a burner phone. The screen showed a single button, Initiate. Her hand was perfectly steady. She thought of her father, of the beautiful, elegant algorithms he had designed, only to have them stolen and corrupted by this man. This wasn't just revenge. It was restitution. It was returning the flaw to his perfect system. She pressed the button. Hundreds of miles away, in a server farm in Iceland, a packet of data began its journey. Julian Croft sighed as he stepped into his wellness pod. It had been a long day of conquering the digital world. The door hissed shut, sealing him inside. "Ariadne," he commanded. "Begin relaxation cycle." The steam began to fill the chamber. For a moment, everything was perfect. Then the lights flickered violently. An alarm blared for a split second before cutting out. The interior display went dead. "Ariadne?" he called out. Silence. "Ariadne, status report." Only the hiss of steam answered him. An unnerving amount of steam. The temperature was rising, fast. He felt the first prickle of sweat on his skin turn into a river. Annoyed, he reached for the manual door release. Nothing happened. He pushed it again, harder. The button was dead. "What the hell?" he muttered. He tried the emergency comms. Also dead. The heat was becoming oppressive. It was hard to breathe. The steam was thick like a physical weight in the air. Panic, a foreign and unwelcome emotion, began to claw at his throat. He started banging on the thick glass door, his fists making dull, useless thuds. He was screaming now, but the pod was soundproof. He was the smartest man in almost any room he entered. He was a billionaire, a visionary, a digital god. But in that moment, he was just a man, trapped in a box of his own design, being boiled alive. His last conscious thought was a flash of impossible, horrifying clarity. The bartender's smile, the dropped earring, the system he thought was perfect. He had been hacked. Not his company, not his bank accounts. Him. Back at The Alchemist, Alara returned to the bar, her expression serene. She picked up a clean glass and a polishing cloth. "Everything okay?" her coworker asked. "Perfect," Alara said, her voice smooth as silk. "Just peachy." She looked across the room. The corner booth was empty again. A blank space waiting for a new story. Two ghosts were quiet. One remained. The most dangerous one. The serpent in the heart of the garden. Her work wasn't finished yet. Senator Alastair Paddington was not a man who frequented bars. Not even one as exclusive as The Alchemist. His vices were more refined, more private. He was the third and final architect of Antonio Rossi's ruin, the political puppet master who had greased the wheels of bureaucracy and shielded Thorne and Croft from legal repercussions. He was a creature of fundraisers, of private clubs, of quiet rooms where the fate of cities was decided over brandy and cigars. He was older, more cunning, and far more insulated than his deceased partners. He was a serpent, coiled in the corridors of power, and to get to him, Alara knew she couldn't be a bartender. She had to become a snake charmer. For 6 months after Julian Croft's tragic accident, Alara disappeared from the alchemist. She cashed out the crypto she had been paid for her various clandestine tasks and used it to fund the creation of her final persona. Amelia Vance, the enigmatic heiress to a non-existent European mining fortune. Amelia was everything Alara was not. She was sophisticated, worldly, and possessed an aura of quiet, old-world wealth. Her backstory was a masterpiece of fabrication, complete with a Swiss trust fund, a portfolio of charitable donations to carefully selected causes, and a digital footprint that spoke of art auctions in Geneva and polo matches in Argentina. She rented a lavish apartment on Park Avenue and hired a part-time assistant who, unbeknownst to him, was feeding her information while believing he was working for a reclusive philanthropist. Her target was Paddington's great passion, his one true vanity project outside of politics, the New York Botanical Conservancy. He was the chairman of the board, a position he used to cultivate relationships with the city's wealthiest donors. It was his garden, and it was there that Alara planned to plant her poison. She made her debut at the Conservancy's annual Black and White Gala, the crown jewel of the city's philanthropic calendar. Dressed in a breathtaking gown of midnight silk, with the diamond necklace Marcus Thorne had given her repurposed as a glittering accessory, Amelia Vance made an entrance. She didn't seek out the senator. She let him come to her. She made a quiet, anonymous donation of a staggering sum enough to fund a new wing for the rare orchids collection. The donation was the talk of the evening. Who was this mysterious benefactor? Paddington, a man with a politician's sixth sense for money and influence, found her admiring a collection of rare ferns. He was handsome in a distinguished, predatory way, with a warm smile that never reached his cold, calculating eyes. "A passion for botany, Miss Vance?" he began, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "A passion for things that are beautiful and patient," she replied, turning to face him. Her amber eyes held his, a flicker of something he couldn't quite decipher in their depths. Things that grow in silence and hold deadly secrets. The line was a hook, cast with perfect precision. It intrigued him. It was a departure from the vapid flattery he was used to. Over the course of the evening, they spoke of rare flowers, of legacy, of creating things that would outlive them. Amelia Vance presented herself as a woman adrift, looking for a worthy cause to anchor her family's fortune. She was selling him a story he desperately wanted to buy, that of a wealthy, intelligent, and beautiful disciple who saw him not just as a politician, but as a visionary. The seduction of Alastair Paddington was a slow, patient game of chess. There were no whirlwind romances or passionate encounters. Their courtship was conducted over board meetings, charity luncheons, and private tours of his personal greenhouse. Alara, as Amelia, became his confidant. She listened to his political frustrations, his dreams of a legacy, his contempt for the new money thugs like Thorne and the arrogant children like Croft. "They had no finesse," he once confided, tending to a rare black orchid. "They were bulldozers. I build gardens where they built monstrosities." "You cultivate," she said softly, and he beamed at her, a man seeing his own inflated self-worth reflected in her admiring eyes. Her weapon of choice came in the form of a gift. Through her research, she learned of Paddington's obsession with one particular plant, the Gimpy Gimpy, or the Australian stinging tree. It was one of the most venomous plants in the world, its fine, silica-tipped hairs delivering a neurotoxin so agonizing that it was known to have driven men and horses to suicide. Paddington owned a specimen, kept in a sealed terrarium, a symbol of his power over nature itself. But he longed for an even rarer variant. Alara, through a series of shell corporations and black market botanical contacts, procured one. But before presenting it, she had her researcher friend perform one last, macabre service. They developed a process to create a concentrated, lipid-soluble version of the plant's own toxin. This refined poison was colorless, odorless, and could be absorbed through the skin. It was also designed to be a slow-acting catalyst, causing a gradual, systemic breakdown of the nervous system. It would not be a sudden sting. It would be a creeping, incurable disease, mimicking the symptoms of a rare motor neuron disorder. She meticulously painted a nearly invisible layer of the clear, toxic oil onto the leaves and stem of the rare plant. She presented it to him in his private greenhouse, a humid, fragrant sanctuary attached to his Georgetown mansion. "Alistair," she said, her voice filled with feigned affection, "I found something I believe you, of all people, will truly appreciate." His eyes widened when he saw it. It was the prize of his collection. He was like a child on Christmas morning. "Amelia, my dear, it's magnificent. Be careful with it," she warned, a subtle double meaning in her tone. "I always am," he said, already reaching for his special pruning shears and protective gloves. But she knew he wouldn't be careful enough. Part of the joy for him was the risk, the proximity to danger. Over the coming weeks, he would tend to his new prize. A microscopic amount of the toxin would be absorbed each time he touched it, through a small tear in his glove, a brush against his forearm. The poison would be slow, patient, and relentless, just like her. The first symptoms appeared a month later. A slight tremor in his hand that he dismissed as fatigue. Then came the muscle cramps, the slurred speech he tried to cover up, the increasing weakness in his legs. His doctors were baffled. They ran batteries of tests, searching for answers, but the poison was designed to leave no trace, to simply accelerate a process that looked tragically natural. Alara was a constant presence by his side, the picture of devotion. She was his rock, his confidant, the one person he could be weak in front of. She watched the serpent slowly, agonizingly, lose his power. The man who had moved mountains with a phone call could barely hold a pen. The man whose voice had commanded senates could barely whisper. The end came in the sterile, quiet room of a private hospital wing overlooking the Potomac. He was a shell of the man he had been, kept alive by machines. Only Alara was with him. She sat by his bed, holding his cold, trembling hand. His eyes, filled with fear and confusion, pleaded with her. "It's not fair," he rasped, the words a monumental effort. "My legacy." Alara leaned in close, her lips almost touching his ear. The warmth of her feigned affection was gone, replaced by an arctic chill. Her voice was a soft, clear whisper, for his ears only. "You want to talk about legacy, Alistair?" she began. "Let's talk about Antonio Rossi, a brilliant architect, a good man. He had a legacy, too, one of beauty and light. You, Thorne and Croft, turned it to ash. You built your garden on his grave." The faintest flicker of recognition, of a memory buried under decades of corruption, sparked in his dying eyes. He tried to pull his hand away, but he was too weak. "Who?" he whispered. "You never saw me," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "None of you did. You saw a bartender, an heiress, plaything. You never saw the daughter of the man you destroyed." She gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "My name is Sophia Rossi, and my father's debt is now paid in full." The terror that flooded his face was her final reward. It wasn't just the fear of death, but the horror of understanding, of knowing he had been hunted, dismantled, and destroyed with a patience and cunning that dwarfed his own. He tried to speak, to scream, but no sound came out. The serpent had been defanged, poisoned by his own prized possession. She stood up, smoothed her dress, and walked out of the room without looking back. Epilogue: months later, a woman stood on the newly developed waterfront of Manhattan. The buildings that now stood there were a corrupted, brutalist version of her father's original vision, a monument to the greed of the men she had killed. But the sun was setting, and for a moment, the light caught the glass and steel in a way that felt familiar, a way that echoed his designs. The news had reported Senator Paddington's death as a tragedy, the rapid onset of a rare neurological disease. The triumvirate was a memory, their names now footnotes in business and political history. Sophia Rossi, no longer Alara. No longer Amelia, drew a deep breath of the salty air. The ghosts were quiet now. The inferno that had raged inside her for years had cooled to embers. There wasn't triumph. There wasn't joy. There was only silence. A vast, empty, peaceful silence. She had stolen their futures, just as they had stolen her father's. It was a perfectly balanced equation. A stranger walking by would have seen only a woman with hauntingly beautiful amber eyes, watching the sunset. They wouldn't have seen the architect of a flawless revenge, a ghost who had walked among gods and brought them to their knees. She turned her back on the skyline and walked away, her footsteps sure and steady. She didn't know where she was going. For the first time in a decade, her future was a blank page, and she was finally free to write it.